Well, Kenneth Branagh, your long association with Wallander is over. We just saw it here in the U.S. a few weeks ago, the final three movies. What was it like for you saying goodbye to this man?
Well, it's the longest time I've ever spent playing a character. It was nearly 8 years. And it was a very sort of personal connection, having read the books entirely for pleasure and not knowing quite that I would be involved with the show in the way that I was. It really took a long time, and rather like the character and rather like the mood of the films, everything to do with the experience of playing it was sort of measured and slow, and you could taste it, you could enjoy it, you could go. Each time I did it, I went to either Sweden itself or to a couple of other exotic places, and it was always a sort of slow burn, and it was very kind of memorable. You really felt the just when you get under those Swedish skies, and especially in Ystad, where most of the shows were shot, it really is cold when that wind blows from off the Baltic. It's very, very nippy, and that northern light also is so crisp and sharp. You know that there's something about it was you felt it. You didn't just do the show. You somehow felt the atmosphere of the place in a very unusual way. And because you knew that you were probably coming back, you ended up having it was very sort of. It was more than just a job, you know. It felt like it was part of your life, and my wife would come over with me, and friends would visit, and it was, you know, you're there 3 or 4 months, and it was very, very meaningful to commit to those big chunks of time.
Well, I'm so glad you shot them all these years over there, because it really is another character, and I don't think it would have been the same shot anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, there's when you drive around, I feel it in some parts of America, but I certainly did in southern Sweden, that it is the land of the big sky, and the relationship. The Swedes are even more obsessed with the weather than we are, and the Brits are fairly obsessive about the weather, and with the assumption that it's going to be gloomy. But particularly in Sweden, the threat, the onset of the winter is a very important part of the cycle of the year, and not everybody likes it. Not many people like it, and although sometimes snow comes along, and that can have there can be some fun attached to that, it can be a little grueling. People tend to dig in a bit for the winter. It can curtail, and in the summer, by contrast, you know, they're looking always at the weather, and because of the way the Swedish social system works, people tend to work shorter hours. They pay much higher taxes, much higher social charges, but they're very keen on the work-life balance and quality of life. And you could really feel that with our crew. You know, at the end of the summer days, they wanted to, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they wanted to be gone to enjoy what there was of the summer. And again, in Northern Europe, those white nights were, very, very, very special. And so there was this sense of the importance of time, and of literally grabbing your time in the sun, and also getting ready to sort of shoulder yourself against the winter. So again, it kept you very, very alive. Senses are very alive when you're there. You're very, very conscious of what's happening in the day, and it feels like 4 seasons in a day. The clouds are very, very dramatic, and of course you can see for a long way. And at night, I was always amazed in Sweden, in Skåne where we were. Once out of the major towns or small villages, there were no street lights, and a real lack of light pollution. So when you were, as we often were, filming out at night in the flatlands of Sweden, it really was pitch black and scary. So it had the atmosphere and the landscape had that sort of quality of a living thing that responded really, really, regularly with people who lived there.
When you first took the role, I mean, this is I'm sure a national fictional hero there in Sweden. Were they okay with a non-Swede taking the role?
I think, because they were proud that that particular character, amongst others across the whole of Scandinavia, were making this quite big inroads into the consciousness of people who are reading and watching fiction around the world. So I think they were very pleased for it to be another export, because actually, what happened aside from us doing it was that the Swedish versions featuring Rolf Larsson and Krista Henriksson also played to a larger audience as well. So it also confirmed the fact that what Henning Mankell had done was create a character, rather like a classical character in another piece of drama that seemed to be of interest to people, even in its different forms. There were, and I was used to think of this because of his Scandinavian connection. It used to make me think of Hamlet, partly because Wallander is such a brooder and such a thinker, but also because I always love going to see the play Hamlet, because it's always somebody different. I mean, of course, I know what goes on, I know the story, but I like to see it because I like to see that new individual play it. So with Wallander, that seemed to be the same thing, and the Swedes, the Swedes seemed to like it very much. The only thing they took exception to was that I was told often that I could not pronounce the word Stadt, which is the name of the town in which I work, whereas I felt as though I'd been saying it and copying it from my Swedish friends accurately for years, but they deny it, and they do it for me again. I'd copy them exactly, and they'd say, "You still can't say it."
Can't make them happy on that word.
No way.
Tell us about the finale, because that's the Emmy ballots here in America were released yesterday, and that's the segment that is up for the Emmy Awards. And you're very familiar with those, of course, having won one, been nominated several times. What about the finale appealed to you, especially as an actor playing a character that's losing his memory, moving forward with Alzheimer's? I mean, that's horrible for a person, but it's rich territory for an actor.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a culmination of what Henning Mankell was writing about, and I remember I was with him on a publicity trip in Germany. His books are very popular there. Germans love their crime fiction, and I think we'd done 2 series of the show, and I remember seeing him in the hotel we were working. He said, I've got it. I said, what do you mean? He said, I've got the last sentence of the last Wallander novel. And I said, so you finished? He said, oh no, I've got tons of chapters to write, but I've got the last sentence. I woke up this morning and I realized how I was going to end it, what I was going to do with him. And I said, do you want to tell me? He said, no, of course I'm not going to tell you. But he felt that he'd found the appropriate kind of Wallanderian way to get to the end of a journey with a man who began in the first shows and the first novels with a relationship to his own father, who was beginning to suffer from dementia. And it became this natural evolution into something that Kurt was aware of as a possibility, because his father had Alzheimer's, that could happen to him. But he brings it upon Kurt very slowly, lots of little almost detective style hints that he has to find out about himself. So that in itself was very, very interesting and pleasing dramatically, although perplexing and then finally tragic for Kurt. And as an actor, there was this opportunity to try and be as faithful as you could to what he was writing, but also to what I have found when I was working on this seemed to be the numerous anecdotal instances of people amongst my friends and acquaintances who have some knowledge of this condition. So many more people were affected by it than I realized, and they all had stories that were not dissimilar to what Kurt was going through. So the challenge was to try and bring that to the screen as accurately as possible, and I was so happy to be able to do that in a show like Wallander, where I knew that actually the show would be able to take the time that it needed to sometimes take the time to watch someone have their moment be wiped clean by this snapping of the synapse in a different way. I felt that I was excited that the show could be as slow as it needed to be to sometimes just capture someone lost.
That's got to be the single best thing about playing somebody over the course of years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, what I found was, particularly in relation to The Troubled Man, was that there was an enormous benefit to, for instance, just the acting relationship, the personal relationship I had with Jeannie Sparks, who played my daughter. Because she joined the show just after she'd left drama school, and she's a terrific actress. And so we spent 7 or 8 years talking about how that relationship developed. You know, we don't see each other much away from the show. So in a sense, there's always these the bits of our real lives to catch up with as well. And some of the sort of human fabric of that definitely made its way into the show. And so I think that that was an enormous advantage. And as you know, in The Troubled Man, there's a brief appearance by David Wallander, David Warner, who played my father, Pobel. And again, the opportunity in the first shows to talk with him about how he was playing that quality, how he was dealing with it, and how he presented it, and just witnessing what he did was also something that you could bring to the execution at the end. So I suppose that length of time meant that in ways that also the portrayal of Alzheimer's required, you just were given the possibility because of that longevity to do less and less and less. You could be more and more economic. You could take more and more away because you know those 7 or 8 years had in a way introduced this very loyal audience to who this fellow was. He didn't have to keep explaining. And there weren't particularly sort of series tropes. There weren't things that had to happen every week. You know, there wasn't a certain kind of plot twist or whatever that had to happen every week. Yes, it's a procedural crime drama, so something needs to get solved. But on the whole, it was usually led by a character twist, whether it was Wallander's relationship to Nyberg, the forensics guy, or whether it was the death of Svedberg in earlier series, or you know, primarily this relationship with his daughter, and then in The Troubled Man, very touchingly, I think, with his granddaughter.
I mentioned Emmy Awards a moment ago. You've been nominated for Wallander before. You won back in 2001 for Conspiracy. And I'm hoping my memory is correct here. I don't think you could be there though for that ceremony. How'd you found out you won the Emmy Award?
It came as a wonderful surprise and blessing on the first night of a West End show that I was directing. That's why I couldn't be there. It was a comedy called The Play What I Wrote, which eventually ended up on Broadway. It was a show about an English double act called Morecambe and Wise, comic double act. And I was at Wyndham's Theatre in the West End, and I, because of the time difference, I was woken up on the very press night, the opening night in the West End, to be told by our producer that we won the Emmy. And it was also particularly meaningful and memorable because this was just after, and it was a delayed Emmys as I recall, it was just after 9/11. So it was also part of a ceremony that was so deeply, deeply, deeply affected, as it, of course, the country was by, you know, what had happened on that day. So in ways that were sad and ways that were joyful, it was a memorable moment.
I can still remember your first Oscars. You were up for directing and acting. Just quite a young guy, just out of school, just a few years. Just tell us about your first Oscar experience.
It was I remember a pretty extraordinary thing. I was appearing in the theater in Japan. We were on tour. And I'd been in Los Angeles. We'd been playing at the Mark Taper Forum, but we were playing at the Tokyo Globe Theatre, and I was playing the role of Edgar in King Lear. And I remember finishing a matinee on the Sunday, and at about 8 o'clock, I got on a plane from Tokyo, and I flew to Los Angeles, and even then was perplexed to understand that I had arrived before I'd left. So it was much earlier on the same day because of the time difference. And that in itself was a mind fudge that was perplexing. I remember going to have dinner that evening with the late Samuel Goldwyn Jr., who had released the movie, and doing that in the house of Samuel Goldwyn, his father, the legendary producer. I remember walking past some pictures on the wall and going in my jet lag state, boy, that looks like a Picasso. Boy, that looks like a Modigliani. Oh my God, that is a Picasso. That is a Modigliani. And they were part of, you know, Sam Senior's collection. And then the next day I was joined by a friend of mine came because my missus then couldn't be there, but I was joined by a friend in LA, and I remember being amazed at quite how early we had to get ready. I was told there was going to be a limo jam of 3 miles down to the Shrine Auditorium, I think it was, in downtown LA. And so I guess it felt like I was getting my tuxedo on at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you were on your way. And at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you were on a red carpet. And then the event happened. And that happened in Hayes. I remember being in the men's room, and that's where I met Steve Martin side by side as we were going about our various business. And Cuba Gooding Jr., I remember, who won that year, as I recall, was also there. Tom Hanks, I remember meeting, has been very, very kind to me, him and Rita. And then a bunch of crazy parties afterwards. It felt just like the whole world was chasing the next party. And eventually ending up at the Beverly Hills Hotel, where I think Steven Soderbergh and I put the world to rights till about 5 o'clock in the morning. And then I realized I had to get to the airport, so I went upstairs and packed, no sleep, and got on a Varig Air flight back to Japan. And I arrived, I guess, 2 days later, even though the flight was however long it was. And I having slept as if it were a dream, I arrived back in Tokyo and went straight from the airport to the theater, where I did a performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream, playing the role of Peter Quince, a crazy director. And so the whole bookending of that first Oscars experience was this amazing dream that involved, you know, great art and great artists and famous actors and craziness and drink and no sleep, and either side, King Lear at one end and Midsummer Night's Dream at the other end. It was very memorable.
Well, because you got the 2 nominations that year when they invited you to join the Academy, did you join the director's branch or the actor's branch?
I joined the actor's branch.
Okay, and you've been in that ever since.
I have indeed, yeah.
Whenever I've got an Oscar voter on, and that's been quite a few times over the last 4 or 5 years, I always ask, and you can be as general or as specific as you want to be, when you got that ballot in front of you, I mean, what's going through your mind? What kind of performances stick out to you that make you want to vote for them?
Well, first of all, I think if you're in the Academy, this is my view, you make a big effort to try and see everything. I love going to the movies, so that is no chore for me. I love it. So so it's, well, you know, it's things that move you. I mean, things that I remember being so vividly strong are things like, for me, things like Charlize Theron's performance in Monster. I remember just thinking, my goodness me, that really is staggeringly good. It's very, very nice if it happens to someone you know. I know and like Charlize very much, but it's just so that adds a certain kind of color to it. But on the whole, I think you try and respond to what you think is special or remarkable work. And I think you try and follow your instinct, your gut. I always try and remember what I felt in the theater. I try and get to see things at the movie theater as much as I can. And I try and remember being moved or being surprised or awed or shocked, and taking great pleasure. I love seeing great work. It it's a thrill, and I want to stand up and applaud. So I try and listen to that. There's a lot of good work out there, so it's not very difficult.
Well, we were thrilled that you got to return as a nominee just a handful of years ago with My Week with Marilyn. That was quite a special thing for you to play one of your heroes, Laurence Olivier.
It was, yeah. It was one of the most fun and interesting things to research, because you're able to go back on this amazingly rich life, and also to read and see so many things that he said and other people said to him and about him on the subject of acting and great acting. And obviously, as an actor, anytime you can learn in that way and feel as though in so learning and absorbing you might become a better actor, is very exciting. So I was totally fascinated to do that. It was really a labor of love, because it touched on so many things that I was interested in, as well as, being centered around this slightly chaotic activity seeming of making films. Sometimes making films with very, very talented people who are challenging individuals. So I have, my own experiences of similar kinds of things, and so the combination of those things, the chance to research something that was close to my heart with an experience of something that was also part of what I do, was really a pleasing, unusual, the privilege of a job, really, that one.
Well, we've been enjoying you for years. Good luck on the Emmy Awards nominations. Will be out in about a month, and we're just thrilled to talk to you today.
It's very nice. Thanks. I've enjoyed it. Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Appreciate it.